Hey, what's up, guys? You're listening to the It Takes a Village podcast. I'm Ashley, your host. This is where the struggles are real, the callings are heavy, the kids are sticky. We come together because it takes a village, and this is your tribe. Hey, everybody. I am super excited today because we are talking about something I've really wanted to talk about in a really long time. And it's something that I think as moms after giving childbirth, like we can all relate to in extremely embarrassing and humbling ways. So I'm really excited to hang out with Catherine Middlebrooks today from BRB Yoga. And Catherine, I'm just super excited to have you on and to chat about mom things.
Well, thank you for having me, Ashley. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, for sure. So we have all been there, right? Like we've all been at the times where we're like, oh no, like you feel the sneeze coming on, and I mean, you already know what I'm about to say because we all like immediately we're like, okay, cross our legs really quick, and then we can sneeze. But we know if we aren't in a position to cross our legs, like it's game over. So we're gonna be talking about like rebuilding your core and pelvic floor strength. But first, I wanted you to tell everybody a little bit about yourself and, who you are, what you do, and a little bit about what life looks like for you right now.
Yes. So thank you. I'm Catherine Middlebrooks. As you said, I'm the founder of BRB Yoga, like Be Right Back Yoga. And my passion really is getting women to rebuild their bodies after they have babies, so that like the ultimate end goal is always so that they can do all the things they want to do, like they can live a big, juicy, full, adventurous life without feeling like their body is limiting them in any way. Because as you say, right, we have these things that happen after we have a baby that maybe make you say, oh, okay, well, maybe I won't go jump on the trampoline with my kids, or maybe I won't go for that run that I used to love doing, but now it feels like my insides are falling out, right? Like there's a lot of stuff like that happens. So that's what I do. But I'm married and I have two young kids. My daughter is 5, my son is 3. And we actually right now are living full time in an RV and traveling around the country while we're also working and building this business. So that's pretty exciting as well. It's not everyone does that.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Fact. Yeah, that's so cool. I always tell my husband, I'm like, we always go through those phases where we're like, let's just throw everything away and like travel the world, and then we don't.
I know. Well, I know it was. It's one of those things where like there's so many awesome things about it, and actually one of the best things was throwing everything away. Yeah. Well, we sold a lot of stuff, but just every big thing we sold felt really liberating. Yeah. But then there are, of course, a lot of challenges to it too, right? We're with our kids all the time, which is wonderful, but also challenging. Yeah. We never have babysitters, and we just have a lot of together time, which my husband and I are both introverts, so that can be a bit challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, you're like, I need alone time, and then you find your little cubby hole area where they can still touch you, But so how did you get into really being passionate about, women's health and rebuilding and their core and all this stuff, like seeing that there was a need for helping moms in particular, especially after they have babies?
Yeah, so it really came a lot out of my own personal experience. So I've been a yoga instructor for over 11 years now. So it's always been a really big part of my life. And I did yoga all through my first pregnancy and felt like, I had like a very textbook pregnancy. Everything went well. I had a natural birth and it was all very good. And I expected, probably unrealistically, because we don't set good expectations for women, but I expected to bounce back, quote unquote, bounce back really quickly after my daughter was born. And I found that, I went back to my yoga practice and I wasn't doing anything crazy. It's not like I was doing these insane, inversions or back bends. I was just doing really simple yoga. But what I found was that every time I did yoga, I felt worse afterwards. My back would ache. I would feel these prolapse symptoms like my insides were falling out. And I just was really struggling to regain core strength. My boss at the time, actually, once I returned back to work after my maternity leave, we were in a meeting and she's always very honest. She told me, like, you look like Raggedy Ann, because I literally couldn't hold myself up in the chair and I was just slumping over. And so it took me longer to really put the pieces together than it probably should have. But probably around, when she was like 8 or 9 months old, I really had to start admitting, okay, well, what I'm doing is not working. And if I'm really being honest with myself, the yoga that I'm doing is actually making things worse. Like, it always felt worse after I did yoga. So that was really struggling. It was a struggle for me because the yoga was so important to my mental and emotional health. And it had always been like my physical fitness type thing as well. But to think, well, the yoga isn't helping me physically, which means I might have to give it up, which means then I don't have the emotional and mental side of it. So that was really challenging. And then I started diving more into the physiology and the anatomy of pregnancy and the postpartum period. And all the pieces started to fall into place of like, oh, well, this makes sense. If I'm doing things like twists and back bends and moving myself through this yoga practice, in many ways, a lot of these very common yoga poses are taking me further away from where I need to be of bringing my abdominal muscles back together and healing my pelvic floor. They were actually creating more damage than good. So once I realized that, I started shifting my own practice, and I did more trainings. I became a postpartum corrective exercise specialist, and just kind of out of that grew BRB yoga. And it's been so wonderful because, one, I feel like it's really important for women, but two, I've also found so many women who really are struggling after childbirth. Like, they feel like their body can no longer do the things that they want it to do. Like, it's rebelling against them, basically. So being able to give women the tools that they need to rebuild their body in a safe, effective way, so that they don't have to say no to anything that they want to do.
Yeah. And I think there's like a balance too, because I think, like you said, we have like this unrealistic expectation that we should be able to bounce back because Kim Kardashian did, or, like some of these other women did. You just see them and you're like, that is not fair. That is not humanly possible. But then when but you're hoping, you're like, man, but I hope that's me. Like,
Right.
So how do we know when it's like normal post-pregnancy body to like, okay, there is something going on with my abdomen. Like, I need to pay attention to this differently. Because for me, I didn't have that issue. I didn't have,
diastasis.
Yes. Yeah. I didn't have that. And so, I wouldn't know the signs, or like how what does that even feel like? Or how do I know that this is not just, my body just giving birth and then it's gonna, go back to normal or whatever. I don't have to think about how I'm exercising or what I need to be doing to not be slumping over in my chair and things of that nature.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So there's a couple of things that I want to say about that. The first thing is, one, I think we have to, your example of Kim Kardashian, right? It may be that she's just fine, but she could also look really good and be peeing herself all the time. Like, we don't know, right? We don't know.
Oh gosh, I hope she is. That'd be awesome. That would make life fair for me.
But it's true, because we can, the core is such a coordinated system. And so when we're only focused on the aesthetics, you can work really hard and get like 6-pack abdominal muscles back. But if your system isn't working well, that excessive strength in your core can then be pushing pressure down into your pelvic floor, right? So I just want to state that just because somebody looks good doesn't mean it's all working well. And I think that's something that's a
important. Really good point. Yeah.
The question of how do you know? Okay, so to a certain extent, right, we're all going to feel really weird after we have a baby.
Yeah.
Of course, everything has changed, everything has shifted. But it's important to note that we all feel really weird at that point, and we feel really weird because our muscles change drastically when we're pregnant, right? You lose your core strength, so other muscles start compensating, and everything gets out of balance. So I always talk about the fact that this like 6 week rule, right? Where you go to your doctor, your midwife, and at 6 weeks, they're like, go ahead, you can go do CrossFit, do whatever you did before.
Yeah.
That really isn't serving any postpartum woman, because at 6 weeks postpartum, especially after you've just gone through like the marathon of pregnancy, giving birth, and then you've spent 6 weeks probably doing nothing except sitting, holding a baby, right? Your muscles are weak, they are out of balance. So to give women that like go ahead to just go do everything, it sets up really bad expectation for women that they should be able to go do everything, when in reality, if you look at what's happening in their muscles, their bodies aren't ready to do that. And often people come through pregnancy and childbirth pretty good, and then they start jumping into things too quick and too soon, and that's when they create things like prolapse or diastasis, because their system just isn't ready to handle the demand of the activities they put on it. So I think it's always, for everyone, like if you just have a baby, you want to take it slow. You want to take at least those first 4 months, and really more likely the first year, to be really mindful about the activities you're doing, because your muscles are out of balance, your hormones are out of whack, like there's a lot going on. So you want to be spending that time really building back your core strength, moving into more low intensity ways. But then if you're, out past that, how do you know that you're struggling with something? Well, there are lots of signs that your system as a whole isn't working well. And that would be things like chronic back pain, feeling like a noodle. That's the way I describe it, like a limp noodle, right? Raggedy Ann, where you just literally can't, you should be able to sit up straight, but you find that you don't have the strength to do that. That sort of chronic pooched belly look, often that is a sign of diastasis, that the muscles have separated and they're not coming back together properly. And you sneeze or jump or do any sort of high impact exertion, that's a sign that the system isn't working well. And also hip discomfort often comes from the fact that the core is weak and isn't supporting the muscles of the pelvis. So all of those things should be a clue to you that like, I should go pursue this a little bit further and see what I can do to just bring balance back to the body.
Okay, so you're far out from having a baby, and you still, like I said, you find yourself in those positions where you want to sneeze, but you feel like you have to cross your legs to do so. My kids are, maybe 3 or whatever, or a year old, but I'm still having to cross my legs. And is it too late? Like, is it too late? Is this my life forever? Like, what do we say to those women?
No, it's not too late. No, it really isn't. You can rebuild the system. I always say, like, if you've had your baby 30 years ago, you can still get that system working effectively. So for those women, I mean, it really is a function that when you're leaking, so what's usually happening is that there's some imbalance going on in the muscles and the pressure within, right? So if you think about a sneeze, right? You sneeze, and it's actually a big pressure increase in your belly. And pressure usually takes the path of least resistance. So if you have some sort of either weakness in your pelvic floor or chronic tightness, which some people only think it's weakness in your pelvic floor that's making you sneeze, but that's not the case. Often it is also a result of overly tight pelvic floor muscles. So
my mind just is like, like my mind is blown right now.
So if you sneeze, the pressure goes up, and then if that pelvic floor muscle isn't designed, if it's not able to handle that pressure increase, well, that's when you leak. So you really then want to start working to rebalance the muscles. And so a lot of that goes into getting the core muscles working again. A lot of postpartum women have a really tight back body and a weak front body. So we've got to like shift that balance a little bit. And that will get the whole system working better. And then getting the breath system working. This is something that not a lot of people talk about, but if you can get really big, full breaths,
Mm-hmm.
tandem with the pelvic floor and the core. So every inhale will relax the pelvic floor, and every exhale will then pull the pelvic floor up. So simply like working on just getting your breathing system can do a lot for restoring the natural tone in the muscles of the core and the pelvic floor.
That is extremely interesting, because you would think,
I
like,
know,
I know,
right?
I mean, and then with all these things out, like, I can't tell you how much since I've had a baby that I've come across, like, all these Kegel exercises, or, do this app and it'll help you. And like, you put like a gadget inside of you and do this and do that.
Right.
And so you're like, oh my gosh, like this, like, what do I do? What do I trust? And something as simple as like focusing on how you're breathing, it kind of just, you're like, wait a minute, like,
Right.
it's as easy
So
as that,
simple.
like something so simple.
Well, it is. I mean, it is as simple as that, but it's actually really interesting when you start looking at women's bodies after they have carried a baby,
Yeah.
how abnormal many of them are breathing. Just because, right? If you think about having a big baby in your belly, that baby grows and it pushes your diaphragm up, so it makes that whole system start working very differently. And so it can really take a few months of training and opening up the back muscles to get all of that working. But your point to like the app, that's such a good point, because I've seen that one a lot. I don't remember what the name is too, but I've seen that one around a lot too. And I'm like, I'm not putting any Bluetooth anything in my but that point to your point about like, okay, so what I was saying before of like tight muscles versus weak muscles.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just Kegels. Kegels are very important if you do have weak muscles. But for a lot of women, we have these chronically tight pelvic floor muscles. One, because we're not breathing well. And two, because right when we get pregnant, our pelvis expands and the hip muscles kind of get a little funky. And then the pelvic floor will start compensating to like hold that pelvis stable. So the pelvic floor, if it's really tight, you don't want to be doing a ton of Kegels. You're just going to be making that tightness worse.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so so how do we know how do we know what kind of pelvic floor we have?
Right. So a good test is to see if you can do a Kegel. Okay. So a weak pelvic floor, you may be able to do a Kegel, but not like hold it if you can hold it for 10 seconds, that's usually a pretty good test of like, okay, well, I'm holding the Kegel, I'm able to hold it for 10 seconds. Well, then your pelvic floor is probably pretty strong. If you try to do the Kegel, but you can only hold it for like 4 seconds or 5 seconds, and then you feel it start to weaken and let go, well, then you probably do need to strengthen your pelvic floor. If you have a tight pelvic floor, you may be someone who has a hard time getting a full breath in. You may, when you take a big breath in, you want to be feeling that breath actually causes the pelvic floor to drop down a little to like relax and expand. If you're chronically tight, when you breathe in, you may not feel that there's any sort of movement there in that pelvic floor because it's just holding so tight. And you probably are also someone who does kind of feel maybe that your hips are a little funky as well, because the pelvic floor and the hip muscles are basically one and the same, the deep hip muscles.
This is so interesting, because I would have never thought that like, and especially because commercials, and I'm assuming maybe because they want us to buy their products and stuff, but it's always like, you need to tighten it. There's never a commercial that's like, no, don't do that. Like it might already be tight enough. Like, yeah. And
I actually find too, this is very anecdotal and I don't have any research to back it up, but from my work, the women that I work with, I find that the women who are more like type A tend to have tight pelvic floors. And the women who are more like relax and go with the flow, those are the women who usually need a little bit more strengthening of their pelvic floors. But if you're someone who's like usually like a little more high strung and a little bit more like, let's get all this stuff done, well, that often translates to tension in your body as well. And so if that's who you are, right, then you can really benefit probably more from meditation and like targeting relaxation of those muscles than strengthening.
All the things that we hate. Because if we're type A,
totally.
Yeah, if we're type A, sitting still, like that's the worst. That's like torture. Like, okay, Yeah, yeah.
Totally.
That's so funny. Well, okay, so I know that you have, as I've looked through on your website, whole like a free training on breath in and of itself. I think that is a really awesome, and especially because it's so hard for us, especially with this Kegel thing. I know that my friends are like, I don't even know what I'm doing. Like, are you supposed to like clench this? Like, I don't even know. And then you watch a tutorial video and you're like, wait a minute, but I don't even see anything happening. Like, I don't know what she's doing right now. She says she's doing it, but how do I know what she's doing?
Right.
And so it's always like, you read those books and you're like, okay, you told me what it should be like or how it should be, but what do I do now?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, yeah, I mean that's a really good point because you can't see it. It's all inside.
Yeah.
But I tend to find that the way people describe Kegels is like so right the general description people use is shut off the flow of urine, which will activate some of those pelvic floor muscles, but I like if you actually look at the anatomy of the pelvic floor, that area right around your urethra, that's like such a small part of it. The pelvic floor goes from your pubic bone all the way to your tailbone, and it's this broad, wide swath of muscles. And you want to be finding engagement in all of those muscles, not just that one little part of it. So there are lots of other cues that people use to like find that engagement. One is like thinking about imagining that you're like there's a bean or something underneath your vagina and you're like trying to lift it up inside of you. So that gets the squeeze and the lift upwards because you want to get both of those feelings of like, okay, I'm squeezing, but I'm also drawing those muscles up inside of me because that starts to bring the engagement through more of the muscles.
Okay.
And then you can also like move your pelvis around, right? You can kind of lean forward onto the front of your pelvis and then try and engage that. That'll help you engage the front of the muscles. You can kind of tuck your pelvis under and sit more on your tailbone and then engage. That will help you engage the back of the pelvic floor. And so feeling that you're getting all of those parts engaged sometimes just takes practice and playing around with it.
Yeah, that is, I mean, just right there, you've shared more information with me than I've ever heard before about the pelvic floor. Yeah.
Yep. There's a lot of information about it.
So what did you, on your journey through this, like trying to figure out, you knew that you had a problem, like what were the things that you found were like, okay, like this is what has been most impactful to me. These are like myths that I just need to shout from the rooftop, like do not believe this. Like what are some of those things that you found as you were going through it and trying to heal your own body?
That is such a good question. Well, the biggest challenge that I found was just that there is so much conflicting information out there. If you go on YouTube, oh my gosh, I mean,
right, or Pinterest,
you will get
even, oh my gosh.
Right. Yeah. So you get people telling you 8 million different things and what you should do and what you shouldn't do and all that. And so just wading through that information and really trying to find reputable sources from which to educate myself, that was probably one of the biggest challenges. And I think probably some of the biggest misinformation that I find out there is that it can, there was this article that went around, it was like viral a few months ago, and it was like, do this one exercise 15 minutes a day to correct your diastasis or your mummy tummy or whatever. It was like even on NPR, I think. And it's that sort of mentality that I think is the biggest disservice to women, because we end up giving women this idea that it's a spot treatment, that you can engage one muscle in one way and that's going to close your gap, or you can just do a Kegel and that's going to make you stop leaking. And it totally minimizes the fact that this is a whole body issue. If you have these issues, you have imbalances in the core and the back and the hips and the pelvic floor, and all of that is contributing to those issues. And so when I started realizing, like, okay, it's not just about dealing with the core. If I'm going to deal with the core, I also have to deal with the back muscles. And that reframing has really changed everything for me. And I think it it really helps when I communicate it that way to women, it like clicks so well because they're like, oh, well, that makes sense why I was doing this one thing and it wasn't having any positive impact because it's
Yeah.
all these other things going on. So I think that notion that it's you can spot treat these issues is the one that I just want to go away. Want that to be gone.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And then what did you find was like the most helpful thing for you in your journey through it?
Yeah. So for me, a huge part of my learning was really understanding the way that alignment and everyday movements impact
Mm.
the health of your core and your pelvic floor. We tend to spend so much time focused when we're like doing the exercises, right? So if you're
Yeah.
on your yoga mat or you're at the gym, then we'll like pay really good attention to what we're doing in our body. But then what we fail to take into account is the way that we're standing, the way that we're sitting, the way that we're moving. The other 23 and a half hours can really completely undo all of that good work
Mm.
because you're spending so much more time doing that stuff.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, it can also really reinforce the work that you're doing. So if you start standing in good alignment and sitting in good alignment, well, then you're going to be strengthening your core and reinforcing the health of your core and pelvic floor every minute of every day. And so then it's like your results become magnified because all that work you're doing at the gym or on your mat, you then basically compound all that during your everyday movements.
Yeah. So for women who are listening and they're like, I don't want to wear panty liners for the rest of my life, like I
And those
should,
will become
yeah,
depends at some point.
exactly. Yeah, that's like my worst nightmare. Like every time my mother, she lives in a home for like 55 and up or whatever, like an apartment complex, and I just see them walking around. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm gonna be wearing a diaper. Like this is gonna be me because of my two beautiful children, but who also ruined my life by like making me leak every time I sneeze.
Right.
So
Exactly.
so for all the women listening who are like, okay, this is me, like especially when you described whether it's leakage or if it's tight, and if your pelvic floor is loose or whatever, like what would be like your first suggestion of here's what you need to do, here's like the first thing that you need to do, and then you move on.
Yeah. Well, so a really great step, I think that we all should do that we don't get encouraged to do is to see a physiotherapist, pelvic floor physiotherapist, right away, right? Like a
Yeah.
few weeks after you give birth, or if you are now way beyond that, like now, go see one if this is
Yeah.
something you're struggling with, because they will then be able to really let you know,
Mm.
okay, yeah, you're tight or you're weak, and that will then give you a little bit more clarity. And they'll do an internal exam to actually help you determine that. And then really the next thing really is start breathing, start working on your breathing. So like you say, I have that free breath training on my website. That is a great place to start, just to begin deep breathing practice every day to start getting your system working and the system talking to each other so all the parts start working together.
So this has been such good information. I'm really glad that I had you on because I know, like we've talked about and repeated several times, like so many women struggle with this and it's embarrassing. And like we joke about it and we joke about how, we're going to wear the diapers or we have to cross our legs. But then honestly, like it really like bothers us. And we don't want to be dealing with it for a long time. And so getting like actual knowledge that isn't just like, here, buy this app because I promise it'll make things better, or
Do a Kegel. Yeah.
yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It is frustrating. I appreciate you for having the conversation. It's so refreshing.
Yeah. So, and you also have a blog where you talk about a lot of these issues. And so, if everybody wants to check it out, it's at brbyoga.com. Yeah. I want to ask you some questions before we hop off here. They're totally unrelated to pelvic floor, but I think I think that everybody will be interested in them anyways. My first question being is, if you could choose one of the most influential books that you've read, what would it be?
Well, it's funny enough because this actually is related to the pelvic floor.
Oh, yeah.
So what the book that I'm reading currently is blowing my mind. It's called Wild Feminine, and it talks actually about how our pelvis and kind of the health of our pelvis is so related to kind of what we're feeling and the emotions that we have in our life. And she really encourages like every person to do DIY, like release of their pelvic muscles, and to start paying attention to patterns. So if you're like, you're always talking to your husband about finances, and then you find, well, that really relates to tension in your pelvic floor. Like those are things that you can become aware of and start basically reprogramming the system, and become more mindful of those triggers so that your emotions in your daily life aren't creating havoc in your pelvic floor. So it's a great book.
Yeah, that's kind of hilarious to think about, though. Like when you're talking about finances, you get tight in your pelvic floor area. You're like, I don't like you right now.
Exactly. Not interested.
Yeah, not interested. You may not enter at all at this time. That's awesome. I also that made me think about, is for women who are they exercise on the regular, is there something that they should not be doing, like to know that, okay, hey, I'm listening to this podcast while I'm running right now, but maybe I'm about to like hop to the gym or do a certain exercise that maybe they shouldn't be doing when they have pelvic floor issues?
Well, so I never like to say like don't do one thing, because I think that is restrictive for women, and they just won't listen. Basically, that's
true.
That's
true.
I'm not going to listen anymore. But I think that being mindful of triggers. So if you are somebody who likes to do high intensity stuff, and you find that every time you do box jumps or something like that, well, then you leak. Well, then you want to start paying attention to your breath, because you want to make sure that you are, there's this phrase, blow while you go. That was not made up by me. It was made up by a physiotherapist.
Okay.
Julie Weave. And it's basically like whenever you're doing something that is hard, you want to do it on the exhale, because then that will naturally engage your pelvic floor and help protect that system. So if you're jumping, you want to make sure that you're jumping on the exhale, because that will help engage everything. So start being mindful of your breath. And if you find, that you are breathing so fast, you're working so hard that you can't keep the breath in sync, well, then you may want to slow down a little bit so that you can pair the breath with the movement. And also start, if it's something that's a more complex movement, like a burpee, where you're, jumping and shooting your legs out and doing all those things, then you want to start just breaking it down into the component movements to see, what part is where you lose the integrity, where do you lose the alignment, where do you actually leak, because that's your weak link. And then you want to start being really mindful of pairing that activity with the breath, or decreasing the intensity a little bit, so that you're not putting that constant strain on your pelvic floor every time you're doing that activity.
Yeah. You just helped so many women out right now. I'm so glad that I asked you that question.
That was a really good question.
Yeah. For me, what gets me is, the trampoline, but then jumping jacks. Then I'm like, are you kidding me? It's, for me, I'm like, this is such a simple exercise and I hate it. I'm like, I hate it right now.
The other thing to think about with jumping jacks, this is such a good one. Your neck. Notice what's happening with your chin and your neck, because the spine is all connected too. So if you are doing jumping jacks and your chin is jutting out on every landing, well, then that is throwing off the whole system, because it's all related. And that is putting excess pressure on your pelvic floor. So you want to keep that chin tucked and the back of the neck really long the whole time. And that's going to help you maintain core integrity too.
Okay. I'm going to try that. I'm already ready to get off so I can put it to the test. But that makes sense, because your spine leads all the way down to your tailbone, and if your pelvic floor is a part of your tailbone, then it's all connected.
It's all connected.
It's all making sense now.
Yes.
This makes so much sense. Okay. So for everybody's going to get off this right now and then test all these things out, and they're which is so good. Yeah.
Love it.
Okay, so next question. That was really great stuff, though. I'm really glad I asked you those questions. Now I have to think of what my next question is. What is your most favorite form of self-care, or what do you love to do that really fills you up?
I love to be hiking in the
Yeah.
mountains, which is pretty awesome with this lifestyle that we have because I have been on some really awesome hikes and some really beautiful places. But that is definitely when I feel the most alive, I get the most inspiration, and I just feel like immense gratitude that I am living this life and out in these beautiful spaces.
That's all. Okay, and then my last question is, if you could empower women in one way, what would it be?
Well, I think that for the most part, I am living this. It really is by getting them in feeling confident in their body
Mm-hmm.
because I believe that once they feel confident that their body can do what they want it to do, then they will feel more confident to go do big things in their
Yeah.
life.
Yeah, that's so true. And I mean, something as simple as exercising. Like a lot of women don't exercise because of the fact that they leak or because of the fact that, they have this gap in their belly and it feels weird. And like, similar to you, like how you felt like your insides were falling out and they feel like they can't do something that they love anymore. And then it prevents them from taking care of, their body or doing other things that they love. And that's so unfortunate. And,
Mhm.
uh, yeah.
It is. It really is. Just seeing women stop. Like,
Hmm.
just, I always say it's like they're sitting on the sidelines of their life because they don't believe that their body can support them.
Yeah. But we
It
know
shouldn't be
that it
that way.
can now.
It can. Yes, it can.
And I'm going to go try my jumping jacks. Um,
Yes, do it.
well, Catherine, thank you so much. Where can everybody find you if they want to contact you, read your stuff, and all that?
Yep, brbyoga.com, facebook.com/brbyoga, and I think I have like 12 posts on Instagram as well at brbyoga, so they can see a couple of pictures from my life on Instagram. I'm working on that one.
Hope you guys enjoyed that episode. Just as a follow up for this episode, I did try those jumping jacks with being aware of where my neck was, if it was sticking out or not. You guys, it actually works. She wasn't playing. So make sure you go try that out because it does make a difference. Also, make sure you rate and review this podcast. I would love for you to share this with other women who need to hear it because you guys, we can't cross our legs forever. So hope you're having an awesome weekend. Catch you guys next time.